Truth be told, I was opposed to living with your father. I've been enduring it for a long time. Why bring this up now? The funeral just ended. I married you thinking I could lead a luxurious life in LA because your parents were wealthy. But without it and even living together with your dad in the end, I had to help with caregiving. It really made me angry. Hearing my husband's true intentions, I was greatly shocked. Unable to speak from the shock, Kyle added, I've been patient all this time. As a reward, give me your father's high-rise condo. It's only fair that I get that much. Wanting to push the conversation forward, he continued speaking briskly. Listen, my parents are already selling their house to move here. Staying in a hotel for a long time will cost a fortune, so hand over the high-rise condo quickly. The high-rise condo that your mother mentioned earlier. Could it be? Realizing my husband's plan, I blurted that out. In response, Kyle smirked triumphantly. Finally got it, huh? The high-rise condo you'll inherit is going to my parents. If you don't like it, let's get a divorce. He said this and handed me the divorce papers. My name is Sophia. I work at a credit union in LA. I was in my mid-30s and had almost given up on marriage when I met Kyle. He was running a cafe in LA and was a client for the financing I was handling. Originally from the countryside, he pursued his dreams with the enthusiasm of a boy, his eyes sparkling as he passionately talked about what he wanted his shop to be like and what he wanted to achieve. Kyle was 4 years younger than me, and even after I was no longer handling his account, he would contact me personally, having developed romantic feelings for me. After several dates, we started dating and got married within 6 months, then began living together in an apartment. One day, I headed to my hometown for the first time in a while. Despite being only a 20-minute train ride away, it had been about half a year since I last visited. My mother passed away several years ago, and my nearly 70-year-old father was living alone. He seemed to enjoy his hobbies and didn't mind living alone, but he had recently slipped on the stairs. He insisted he was fine, but I was concerned and went to visit. When I arrived, the entrance was a mess, which was unimaginable for my neat freak father who wouldn't leave his shoes unaligned or packages lying around. When he came out of the room, he was smiling but limping, which surprised me. Are you okay? I asked worriedly as I approached him to ask how he was feeling. He seemed a bit embarrassed and replied, It's probably my age, but I end up like this over little things. It's troubling how slowly I heal. Don't overdo it. Shall I carry these packages to your room? Is there anything else I can help with? When I asked, my father scratched his head and said, I'm sorry. Seeing my father after such a long time, he seemed visibly smaller than before. His limp made him appear frail. I couldn't help but worry about him living alone. With no close relatives nearby and my job to consider, commuting daily to my father's house was challenging. The thought of living together crossed my mind. However, this was not a decision I could make alone. That day, I prepared meals for a few days to ensure my father could rest comfortably and left my home. After returning home distressed, I shared my father's recent condition with Kyle, who had just come back. He's nearly 70, huh? That must be tough. Yes, it is. With his leg condition, I'm sure even shopping is a struggle. I wish I could go every day to check on him, but that's difficult. True, your workplace is in the opposite direction. So, if it's okay with you, could we consider living with my dad? Kyle looked surprised and his eyes widened. I couldn't tell if his reaction was positive or negative, and I felt a bit anxious. I intend to contribute to the living expenses. There's no rent, and it would be closer to your cafe. My commute would be a bit longer, though, but I think there are no downsides for you. After saying this, Kyle remained silent, thinking it over. Finally, he clapped his hands decisively and said, Let's live together. Really? Yes. As you said, it might be good for me too. Most importantly, I'm worried about your father. If it eases your concerns, living together is a good choice. Kyle, thank you. And so, we moved to my family home and started a new life with my father. My father owned a high-rise condo and had rental income, so he had a stable income even after retirement. He still had some retirement funds left, and he said we didn't need to pay rent or living expenses. Meanwhile, Kyle's cafe was not doing well, and his income was decreasing. Living with my father helped our finances, and I took on all household responsibilities as a way to give back. On weekends, I acted as a driver, taking my father to places he wanted to visit. Although his mobility was limited, my father, who had always been active, seemed to enjoy his lifestyle. Next, I want to go here. During the weekdays, my father would research various places on his computer, seriously picking where to go on the weekend. When he decided, he always reported back to me with a smile. For me, going to the places my father was interested in became a highlight of my weekends, and a good relationship was established between Kyle, my father, and me. I felt the decision to live together was the right one. However, these peaceful days did not last. One day, my father fell indoors and became bedridden, not just limping anymore. It was then that Kyle began to show his true colors. I thought, Dad's lunch is still here. When I returned from work, I found my father's lunch, which I had prepared in the morning, left untouched in the kitchen, and I instantly had a bad feeling. I rushed to my father's room. Dad, what happened to your lunch? Are you feeling ill? Welcome back, Sophia. My condition is the same as usual. I'm fine. Did Kyle forget to prepare it again? Kyle is busy with his work. It's understandable he forgets. Despite my father defending him, I was upset with Kyle's recent behavior. This was not the first time Kyle had failed to serve my father's lunch. Since my father became bedridden and could no longer leave his room on his own, I had relied on Kyle, who started work later, to provide lunch for him. However, though my father required caregiving, Kyle was clearly reluctant in taking care of him, and he only helped a few times. After that, he began to refuse, making excuses, and neglecting my father. Even when I asked for help, Kyle's attitude did not change. On the contrary, he started to speak harshly. Why do I have to take care of your dad? But you agreed to live together, didn't you? But I never said I'd do caregiving. Since we started living together, Kyle had been receiving a significant amount of financial support from my father for his store. In such a situation, I was angry with my husband for complaining about caregiving and not showing gratitude. Moreover, complaints came from his parents too. We thought it was wonderful to live in a single-family home in LA, but to think you moved in together just to make Kyle take care of your father. What? I didn't mean that. Moving in was a decision made together with Kyle. Kyle said he accepted because you pushed him hard. I feel sorry for Kyle. You should manage your own parents' issues yourself. My mother-in-law shouted this and hung up the phone before I could argue. I was upset not only by Kyle's portrayal of our situation to his parents, but also by my mother-in-law's response. Despite knowing that my father had become bedridden, his parents did not offer any words of concern for his health or any appreciation for me. The call from my mother-in-law brought not only anger but also sadness. I thought, can I really consider them as family if they don't cooperate in such circumstances? Thinking this, I spent my days overwhelmed with work, household chores, and caring for my father. After a while, my father passed away. Although he used to enjoy going out, after becoming bedridden, he appeared cheerful but gradually became depressed and lost his appetite. Until the end, he acted cheerful, saying, "Don't worry, I'm fine," and concerned about whether I was getting along with Kyle. Looking back, I feel I burdened him greatly. After my father's funeral, regret continued to pierce my heart. I tormented myself with self-loathing, wondering if I could have done more, or if discussing things properly with Kyle could have spared my father the worry. At that moment, I heard the door open and looked towards the entrance. I thought it was Kyle returning home, but his parents followed him inside. I hurried to the entrance. "Father or mother, thank you so much for coming all this way." Kyle's parents had traveled several hours by train from their home, staying at a hotel to attend the wake and funeral. I expressed my sincere gratitude. However, the response I received was unexpected. "Don't mention it. More importantly, when would be a good time to move? We'd like to do it as soon as possible." I was confused, not understanding what they were talking about. But despite my confusion, my mother-in-law continued the conversation. "I've always dreamed of living in the heart of the city. A high-rise condo, I never imagined it. It's like a dream, isn't it? Yes, the view must be amazing. I can hardly wait." My father-in-law replied with anticipation. I was bewildered by the sudden mention of moving and high-rise condo, unable to grasp the situation. "Mom and Dad have always dreamed of living in a high-rise condo," Kyle said. As I remained silent, Kyle, frustrated by my lack of response, glared at me. "Truth be told, I was opposed to living with your father. I've been enduring it for a long time. Why bring this up now? The funeral just ended. I married you thinking I could lead a luxurious life in LA because your parents were wealthy. But without it and even living together with your dad, in the end, I had to help with caregiving." It really made me angry. Hearing my husband's true intentions, I was greatly shocked. Unable to speak from the shock, Kyle added, "I've been patient all this time. As a reward, give me your father's high-rise condo. It's only fair that I get that much." "Reward? But you've received considerable support from my father too, right? That doesn't matter anymore. It was really helpful while it lasted. What? My anger rose as I felt my father was belittled, but Kyle seemed indifferent. Wanting to push the conversation forward, he continued speaking briskly. Listen, my parents are already selling their house to move here. Staying in a hotel for a long time will cost a fortune, so hand over the high-rise condo quickly. The high-rise condo that your mother mentioned earlier. Could it be? Realizing my husband's plan, I blurted that out. In response, Kyle smirked triumphantly. Finally got it, huh? The high-rise condo you'll inherit is going to my parents. If you don't like it, let's get a divorce. He said this and handed me the divorce papers. At the word divorce, something inside me snapped. I thought, I've reached my limit. Okay. What? Kyle looked unable to hide his surprise at my brisk reply. Hey, are you serious? You're saying you want to divorce? That's fine. I can imagine continuing to live with someone who married me for money and despises even the help my father gave. Just get out of my sight. I shouted loudly and snatched the divorce papers from Kyle. For a moment, he was taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. Your father has passed away, and you're not thinking clearly. What? I'll give you 3 days to think it over. Make sure you don't regret this. With that, he left the house, taking his parents with him. 3 days later, as scheduled, Kyle and his parents showed up in front of the high-rise condo. They were trying to enter the condo without permission, but I had already taken precautions. When Kyle rang the intercom, someone appeared from inside the house. This will be ours from now on. Could you please leave quickly? Kyle was saying that politely, but his attitude conveyed disdain. However, the person calmly responded to Kyle, saying, I own this property. I cannot leave. That's impossible. My wife inherited this high-rise condo. It can't be yours. Unfortunately, what this person is saying is correct. Hot Sophia. Surprised to see me emerge from behind the resident, Kyle was taken aback. I explained to Kyle, this person is Mr. Simpson, a friend of my father. He has been living here for a while, but it doesn't make sense for this to be his. It was originally your father's and you were supposed to inherit it, weren't you? This room has already been sold. What? Mr. Simpson had been living in the high-rise condo owned by my father for some time and had frequently visited our family home even after my father fell ill. After my father's death and learning Kyle's true intentions, I decided not to let things go his way and sold the high-rise condo to Mr. Simpson. When Kyle learned that, he flew into a rage, confronted me, and hurled insults. What are you deciding on your own? What about the place meant for my parents to live? Well, do you even realize what you've done? Do you think it's okay to make such a big decision without your husband's consent? We're not married anymore, are we? What? Surprised by my response, I calmly answered. You said if I didn't want to hand over the high-rise condo, we should get a divorce. That's invalid. You tricked us, so I won't divorce you until you've paid for your mistakes. If you say you'll buy back the high-rise condo for my parents, I might consider not getting a divorce. I was just dumbfounded by Kyle's claim. I regretted ever marrying such a self-centered person. Unfortunately, the divorce papers have already been submitted. You brought the filled-out divorce papers, didn't you? Also, I plan to sue you for compensation. Compensation? Don't joke. I haven't done anything to be sued for. At the word compensation, Kyle seemed to care less about the divorce and made a fuss. I was confident of my victory. Let me explain that in detail as a lawyer. Mr. Simpson, who turned out to be a lawyer, intervened in our tense situation. Kyle couldn't hide his surprise upon learning that Mr. Simpson was a lawyer. You have verbally abused Sophia, who was caring for her father, and even after her father's death, you aggressively pursued the inheritance, causing her mental distress. These actions are sufficient grounds for a claim for damages. That's a lie. In front of liar Mr. Simpson, Kyle found himself unable to respond. Behind him, his parents were also looking terrified. A few minutes of silence followed. Unable to bear the weight of the silence, Kyle appeared on the verge of tears. Wait, Sophia. I was wrong. I apologize, so please drop the claim for compensation. My plan was... I intended to clear my debts by giving the high-rise condo to my parents. Kyle pleaded, but it was no longer of any concern to me. As I silently stared at Kyle with a cold look, my former mother-in-law began to speak. Sophia, Kyle was wrong this time. We apologize, too. Could you please give us the condo? She seemed to have a strong desire for the high-rise condo, as she asked me with tears in her eyes. I'm asking you, too. Her husband added desperately, but my anger was not appeased. No matter how much my former husband and his parents apologized, my heart would not be swayed. Isn't it too convenient to apologize and seek forgiveness now? The condo is already Mr. Simpson's, and I will claim compensation. Please never show yourself in front of me again. As I spoke coldly, Mr. Simpson continued as if to support me. If you continue to stay here, we will have to call the police. Are you okay with that? All right, we're leaving. At the mention of the police, Kyle and his parents hurriedly left the condo. Months later, after a fallout with his parents due to differing stories, Kyle, with no sources of funding left and the cafe business continuing to worsen, found himself unable to borrow money from anywhere and eventually had to close down. Having lived a carefree life, Kyle searched for a job, but no place would hire him due to his self-centered nature, and he ended up bouncing between day jobs to scrape by. His parents started renting an apartment in the city with the money from the sold house, but their funds were quickly depleted due to high rent and living costs, and now they both are working part-time to make ends meet. I sold the family home, which was too large for me alone, and bought a new apartment. After the hectic days, I have finally settled down, and lately, I am slowly reclaiming my time. I am looking forward to finding hobbies and enriching my life, just like my father, who had many interests. When Eric, my husband, learned that I could not inherit my father's fortune, he flew into a rage. Wait, what? You won't inherit the money? Then you're of no use to me. I want a divorce. After that declaration, he quickly remarried my sister. I took my revenge on them. I am Angela. I am 32 years old and an employee at a general company. It's been 2 years since I married Eric. Our marriage was arranged by our relatives. Our family, while small, owned property, and my sister Mari and I were the only daughters without sons. Relatives were then naturally concerned about who would take over the estate, so they recommended a husband who didn't mind marrying into our family. After the marriage, Eric, who wasn't adopted into the family, started living with us at the family home. My mother passed away a few years ago. Since then, my father, my husband, and I have been maintaining the household. My husband was very kind-hearted, friendly to my father, and seemed to be an ideal person. However, the relative who introduced Eric had expressed a concern just before our marriage. It might seem strange to say this after I've introduced Eric to you, but he has a bit of an obsession with money, so be careful, they said. With the wedding imminent, it was troubling to hear this, but since Eric showed no outward signs of greed, I ignored my doubts and went ahead with the marriage. Even after we were married, I kept my relative's words in the back of my mind, but Eric didn't seem particularly obsessed with money. However, he did seem interested in my father's inheritance, casually asking about it, often when my father was having a drink. Since my father answered him frankly, I didn't worry much about it. My husband also had another interest, my sister. She was 5 years younger than me, and in contrast to my calm demeanor, she was lively and energetic, with a glamorous social life with men. We didn't look alike, so when my husband first met my sister, he was surprised and muttered, "Your sister has a completely different vibe from you, doesn't she?" Seeing my husband looking at my beautiful sister, who had clear, distinct features, stirred complex emotions in me. The relatives had introduced Eric to me because they were concerned that if I, being introverted and unnoticeable, did not marry, there would be no one to carry on the family. At the time, I felt that such worries were unnecessary because I had a beautiful and popular sister, but over time, I came to understand why the relatives were so concerned. My father doted on my sister, and after she graduated from high school, he let her go to college and then to vocational school. She didn't have a clear goal for further education. She just wanted to avoid working. On the other hand, my mother was strict with her. She urged my sister to get a job immediately after college. But my father overruled my mother and allowed my sister to go to vocational school. After graduating from vocational school, my sister got a job through one of my father's acquaintances, but quit after just half a year. Her reason for leaving was surprising. I can't make use of my skills at that company. My mother and I were astonished that my sister was speaking as if she completely understood the nature of the work, despite only being there half a year. But for some reason, my father believed her story, found another company, and helped her get rehired. When my sister got used to her new job, my mother became ill and needed to be hospitalized. While my mother was in the hospital, my sister visited her every day and started taking more days off work. Eventually, she quit her job, claiming she would take care of our mother. However, her nursing was mostly chatting with my mother or playing with her smartphone in the waiting room. I took care of my mother, did the laundry, and replaced things. My sister was of no help. For my mother, having someone to talk to might have been a comfort, but a month after the hospitalization, her condition worsened and she could no longer speak. Less than 2 weeks after her condition worsened, my mother passed away. With the sudden passing, my father and sister were out of it, so I had to make the funeral arrangements. Our relatives helped, and we somehow managed to take care of things. After losing our mother, my sister started working part-time and moved out to live on her own. With only the income from her part-time job, she couldn't make ends meet, so our father paid for her rent, utilities, etc., while she seemed to use the money for leisure. When funds ran short, she would visit our father to receive more pocket money. Because our mother was strict, my father had not given my sister an allowance while our mother was still alive, but now he seemed to give it without hesitation. I took it lightly, thinking that if my father and sister were happy with it, then things were fine. Even after I started living at my parents' house with my husband, my father continued to give my sister an allowance. At that time, I hadn't realized that my sister was also seeking financial support from my husband, and he seemed happy to oblige. Keep this a secret from Angela. She might get jealous if she finds out, my husband told my sister. My sister happily worked part-time and lived off the money she received from our father and my husband. But such a lifestyle couldn't last forever. My father fell ill and had to be hospitalized. I visited the hospital in between work to take care of him, but my sister never showed up. Instead, she started contacting me, demanding money. I need you to give me the money Dad used to give me every month. The rent and utilities are being paid from his account, after all. My sister's angry tone surprised me, and I was surprised when I found this out. I was annoyed at her for only caring about her own finances, instead of being worried about our father's condition. I wanted to end the call, but since she seemed lost, I asked her about the amount our father used to give her. How much are you receiving from Dad each month? Hurry up and find a job, and then live on the money you earn from that. She replied with dissatisfaction. Don't tell me that again and again. I'm getting $1,000 every month. The rent and stuff are separate. I was astounded when she confidently disclosed the amount. If an adult were given such an amount every month, it's unlikely they would have the motivation to take work seriously. Although my father was hospitalized, I believed he would recover soon, so I didn't think giving her money was a big issue. However, my father's condition suddenly worsened, and I had to urgently contact our relatives. The doctors told us the situation was serious, and I was deeply shocked by the news. I wanted my husband's support at such a time, but he hardly came to the hospital, citing work reasons. And when he did come, he would ask inappropriate questions like, "Is your father's inheritance large? Will you and your sister split it since you're the only children?" I was at a loss for words with a husband who showed interest only in my father's inheritance. The relatives' warning that my husband was money-hungry became a reality, and I felt disgusted. When I answered my sister's call and told her about our father's critical condition, she again prioritized her finances. "Well, anyway, make sure the monthly payment comes through." "I can't live without that money," she said, and the call ended there. While feeling indignant at my sister's words, I also became concerned about the male voice I faintly heard on the other end of the phone. It was a familiar voice, which made me feel uneasy. A month later, my father passed away, but my sister and husband didn't show up until the end. I had experienced the burden of preparing for a funeral during my mother's passing, and now I felt it again. To make matters worse, my husband and sister didn't offer any help, and my sister didn't even attend the funeral. My husband attended, but left immediately after, saying he had work. The relative who had introduced me to my husband noticed his absence and asked me, "Isn't your husband supposed to be here?" Isn't it odd for the main person in mourning to be absent? All I could do was respond with a wry smile. I guess he's busy with work and had to leave, I said. Hearing my response, the relative sighed, but I also felt a deep desire to sigh. After my father's funeral ended quietly, and I had a moment of relief, my husband asked me with a smirk, "Finally, huh? So how much will you inherit? Even half would be a substantial amount, right?" As the relatives had warned me before the marriage, it seemed that my husband's mind was filled with thoughts of my father's fortune. Disappointed in his inappropriate remarks, I responded casually, "My sister gets $10 million and I get nothing." Legal consultations hadn't even started, and I had yet to sort out my feelings just after the funeral. Seeing my husband gleefully talk about the inheritance, I couldn't help but laugh out of anger. Taking my words seriously, my husband immediately raised his voice. "What, you can't inherit the fortune? Then you're of no use to me. I want a divorce." I felt the same way and gladly agreed to his proposal. "That's fine. It's clear that you married me for my father's inheritance from the start. I'll gladly divorce you." I shouted this as I thrust the already prepared divorce papers at him. Caught off guard that I had the divorce papers already, my husband was a bit shaken, but quickly signed them. As he left the house, he said, "I'm divorcing you, who got zero from the inheritance, to remarry your sister Mary and get $10 million. Unaffected by his words, I immediately went to the legal office and filed for divorce. In the end, I was able to cut ties with a heartless man who was only obsessed with money. The next day, my ex-husband rushed to submit a marriage registration to marry my sister. A few days later, he called me. Still believing the previous story, he raised his voice. "When will the inheritance division begin? Hurry up and give Mary $10 million. I was quietly waiting for his call. I had no intention of going out of my way to contact him after he left the house. I responded to my ex-husband in a business-like tone. "Let's meet at our house this Sunday. I'll be waiting to discuss things then." My ex-husband, believing he was to receive an inheritance, seemed ecstatic after hanging up. However, the thought of seeing his reaction when he learned the actual facts was a sort of pleasure for me. When the weekend came and my ex-husband and sister arrived at our family home, they were surprised to find that I had invited a lawyer. But my ex-husband began to speak as if he were still satisfied. Of course, when inheriting a large sum of money, the presence of a lawyer is required. The lawyer then began to speak to my ex-husband with a puzzled look. "There is the matter of the inheritance. But before that, there is the issue of the compensation claim from Angela to you, Eric." As he said this, he showed him some photos. The photos captured my ex-husband leaving my sister's house, with the dates clearly marked. The lawyer continued to explain in detail to my ex-husband. "Here are photos that serve as evidence of infidelity before the divorce was finalized. Therefore, a payment for compensation is necessary." I had overheard my ex-husband and sister discussing the inheritance over my sister's phone and immediately hired a lawyer to investigate my ex-husband's infidelity. While I was busy with my father's funeral, my ex-husband and sister had been meeting frequently at her home, and as a result, we were able to obtain many incriminating photos. The topic of inheritance division changed to a demand for compensation, leaving my ex-husband and sister speechless. But my ex-husband quickly retorted, "Compensation is trivial compared to $10 million inheritance. I will pay it immediately." He said this confidently, and when the lawyer presented the demand for compensation, he signed without hesitating. Witnessing his signature, I declared to my ex-husband, "I hope you find happiness with a sister who has no inheritance. Now that you've signed, you'll certainly be paying compensation." My sister was dumbstruck upon learning there was no inheritance. "What do you mean I don't have an inheritance? I heard it was $10 million. My ex-husband also became red with indignation. "It's impossible, there's no inheritance. I won't let you have all of it." The lawyer began to explain the facts calmly to this furious couple. "Miss Mary is actually the daughter of your mother's previous husband and not legally related to your recently deceased father. As there was no adoption, she's not entitled to the inheritance. I explained the situation to my confused sister. You were too young to remember when our father and mother remarried, but I remember it well. I was 6 years old when our parents married, and I still remember the joy of having a new sister. What I never imagined was that this sister would one day take away my husband. Our young parents had their struggles, and I recall the people around them supporting their remarriage. My mother loved me as her own, and my father cared for my sister. Perhaps my father was especially considerate of her because she wasn't his biological daughter. They both had children from previous partners when they remarried. But my mother refused to adopt my sister with my father due to suspicions from relatives who thought she was after the father's wealth. The relatives urged me to marry quickly because they knew I was the only one who could inherit the father's property. There were no children between my father and mother, which may have been fortunate. If they had had children together, the inheritance issue would have been even more complicated. They probably avoided having children together to prevent such disputes. Now that it was clear my sister had no right to an inheritance, I understood why my father had always supported her. I had no legal adoption between my mother and I, but it never crossed my mind in day-to-day living. It seems our parents never told my sister about their remarriage, and she was learning the truth for the first time now. My ex-husband's expression, which had been filled with anger earlier, turned pale as he realized he wouldn't get the expected inheritance from my sister, and that his earlier signature would force him to pay compensation. With a pale face, he asked me, "Was what you said before, my sister gets $10 million and I get nothing, a lie?" Trying not to laugh, I answered. Of course it was a lie. It was retaliation for your infidelity. Besides, my father's estate couldn't possibly be worth $10 million. Even if my father was a property owner, there was no way he had an inheritance of $10 million. My sister, who had been quiet for a long time, suddenly spoke up. I did a lot of shopping relying on Dad's inheritance. And what about the money Dad used to send to me until now? Will you take care of it, big sister? To my meek sister, I replied, you already have a dependable husband in Eric, so you don't need any more help, do you? He should be taking care of you. My sister was staring at her pale-faced ex-husband, but he shook his head. I, too, have squandered a lot, expecting the inheritance from my father-in-law. I'm not in a position to help. I have my own overwhelming problems, like compensation. After saying this, he suddenly fell to his knees at my feet and began desperately apologizing. Angela, I am truly sorry. It was all my mistake. Please forgive me and let me have another chance. The lawyer, preparing to leave, could not hide his laughter. The once arrogant attitude was gone, and now the sight of my husband groveling was almost comical. After the discussion, my ex-husband and sister left the house dejectedly and seemed to quickly finalize their divorce. For my ex-husband, who had remarried for the sake of my sister's inheritance, there was no longer any interest. As he had told my sister, he now owed me compensation and could not take care of her. Since he had no property, I decided to receive compensation from his salary in installments. The lawyer advised that this method would prevent any loss from non-payment. Meanwhile, my sister, having lost our father's support, had to make ends meet with daily part-time jobs, but she could not repay her debts and eventually went bankrupt. After she left the apartment she lived in, no one knew where she went. My father had provided financial support for my sister out of love, but such indulgence probably stinted her desire to work. Since I started to live alone at my parents' house, relatives have tried to introduce me to another marriage partner, but I refused. I want to avoid being introduced to a man like the last one, and next time, I plan to be careful and find a man to share my life with on my own. I am Julia. I was abruptly woken up by a phone call just now. On the other end, my mother-in-law was saying something unclear. And the room is completely dark. That's obvious. It is late at night. The time is just past midnight. It's naturally dark because it's the middle of the night. No, that's not it. The lights won't turn on. Is that so? Is that so? What kind of response is that? You did something, didn't you? No, the one who did something was you, mother-in-law. Huh? Me? Yes, you kicked me out of the house. She balked for a moment as I raised my voice. However, she quickly retorted, "It's normal for a wife to leave if there's a divorce, isn't it?" That's right. If that's the case, let me speak clearly as well. I don't want to hear the complaints of a discarded wife. However, if you don't listen, you'll go from a dark house to a prison. Saying that, I started to tell my story. I first met my mother-in-law about a year ago. It was when I went with my husband Max to greet her and announce our marriage. Her home, where she lived, was in a luxury apartment, and at that time, Max was still living there as well. Nice to meet you. I'm Julia. Julia, what do you do for a living? I am currently working at a publishing house as a magazine journalist. However, I plan to resign due to marriage. I was thinking of becoming a full-time housewife. That's because being a magazine journalist is very demanding. I often had business trips to the countryside, spending about half of the month away from home. Even when at home, I was busy writing articles and barely managed to keep up with household chores. For that reason, I am planning to quit my job. Many mothers-in-law do not think highly of daughters-in-law who neglect their household duties, so I believed she would agree with my decision to resign after marriage. However, the mother-in-law in front of me frowned and said, "Can you manage without both working? My husband is on a solo assignment, so I can't help financially." "That's okay. I am already at a certain age and have saved up enough," I replied, feeling a bit of loneliness. I am 29 years old this year. Despite this, I had neither a fiancé nor a boyfriend and was so busy with work that I hardly had any male friends. My classmates were getting married one after another, and I was even receiving wedding invitations from colleagues at work. Feeling that this was not good, I started looking for a partner a year ago. I participated in matchmaking events almost every week, and finally found a reliable husband with a sturdy build who works at a security company. We matched in personality and interests. Therefore, we started considering marriage early on. It seemed Max felt the same way, as he proposed to me just a few months after we started dating. Our decision to marry was firm. Even though my mother-in-law opposed it, we intended to get married. While thinking about this, my mother-in-law said to me, "At this age, there are times I think I should have continued working. Is that so?" "Yes, so keep working. Don't have regrets." "Understood. I will continue working." Upon reflection, I felt there was some truth to her words. Thus, I decided to keep my job, and my mother-in-law also agreed to our marriage. Thus, we decided to get married. After submitting our marriage registration, I discussed with Max about our new home. Max was worried about his mother and wanted to live with her if possible. Having lived in his family home for a long time, he said it felt more settled. However, I was opposed. I wanted to avoid living with my mother-in-law at all costs. It might be one-sided, but I thought living together as daughter-in-law and mother-in-law could lead to trouble. I thought it would be better to live separately from the start to avoid any trouble. Max and I did not agree, and time passed by. Still, it was an issue that couldn't be ignored. As we continued discussing, Max made a suggestion. "Then, shall we ask my mother's opinion?" "Your mother's opinion?" "Yeah, Mom doesn't say anything wrong." At that moment, I was momentarily perplexed. Believing one's mother is always right is a typical characteristic of a mama's boy. Could it be, my husband is a mama's boy? If so, the mother-in-law would surely push for living together. I quickly said to Max, "Wait a moment. What? We are adults too, and relying on your mother is..." "Don't worry. It's not strange to listen to the advice of an elder." While saying this, Max dialed his mother's number. He was smiling brightly, and an indescribable atmosphere was floating around. Inside, I was panicking. Mom?" "Actually," Max explained the situation to his mother with a smile. Just when I thought it was over, Max's expression changed. Yeah, I understand." He ended the call looking dejected. "What's wrong?" When I asked, Max replied grumpily, She said we should rent an apartment together, just the two of us. Really? Why, you seem happy? Do I? I wanted to live with Mom. But your mother said you two should live by yourselves, right? Yeah, Max answered, clearly dissatisfied. In the end, it seemed he was not fully convinced. When I said I would pay the rent, Max reluctantly accepted. Thus, we somehow began our married life. Once we actually started living together, the joy was indescribable. We could fully enjoy our common hobby of watching movies without my mother-in-law interrupting. Also, when I was busy with work, Max actively helped with cooking and laundry. Before we got married, laundry would pile up, and I often relied on frozen meals. But having Max around meant I didn't have to worry about that anymore. He even came to greet me when I returned home. I was once again feeling how reassuring it was to have Max with me. One day, while feeling this happiness, I had to go on a business trip to Florida. I'll be gone for 5 days, but I'll try to come back as soon as possible, I told Max as I left the house. Since our newlywed life was so enjoyable, I couldn't wait to return and finish my assignments ahead of schedule. I wonder if he'll be surprised by just a one-day difference? Thinking this, I hurried home. When I opened the front door of the house, I could hear voices coming from the room. Max, the delicious food is ready. It was my mother-in-law's voice. I could also hear my husband's voice. Your cooking really is the best, Mom. Isn't it? Julia's cooking is a bit. Are you staying over tonight? Yes, I plan to. Hearing the cheerful conversation between my mother-in-law and husband made me a bit irritated. I'm certainly not good at cooking, but I didn't think I was completely incapable. Being criticized so openly made me angry. Usually, my husband never complained about me. This definitely sounded like something a mama's boy would say. I laughed self-deprecatingly and swung the living room door open with force. I'm home, I said loudly. At that moment, both my husband and mother-in-law jumped in surprise. Welcome back, Julia. You're early, my husband said to me, sounding frightened. I finished my work early. By the way, why is your mother here? She heard you were away and came to make dinner specially. And she's staying over? Well, my husband stuttered. Looking at my mother-in-law, she hurriedly began to clean up. Mother-in-law, are you staying over? I really want to, but wouldn't I be in the way? Yes, you would, I answered, just as my husband raised his voice. How could she be in the way? She's my mother, and even though by marriage, she's your mother too, Julia. But we are newlyweds. So what if we are? What does that have to do with anything? My husband stood up and shouted. Overwhelmed by his attitude, I fell silent. Feeling he had gained the upper hand, my husband said, Mom, you're staying over tonight, right? Is that okay? It's fine. Then, I'll stay over. My mother-in-law answered with a broad smile. Seeing her face, I couldn't utter a word. At this moment, it seemed my role was cemented. Since that day, my mother-in-law began staying at our house frequently. Effectively, I was placed at the bottom of the household hierarchy. When I told my husband I would be late from work, he casually said, It's okay. I'll have Mom come over. What will your mother do when she comes? She'll cook and do the laundry. Didn't Max used to do that before? Mom does it better. But is my mom in the way? When my husband pressed me like that, I couldn't argue back. I didn't want to be seen as a daughter-in-law who finds her mother-in-law bothersome. In the end, I had no choice but to follow what my husband said. However, I needed to find a solution to this situation. I began to ponder a good resolution during breaks at work, but such ideas are not easily conceived. At that moment, I suddenly received an email from my parents. When I read the email, I sighed and muttered, They're doing whatever they want again. My parents are always all in on everything and act quickly once they decide. This time, they seemed to find charm in rural life. They informed me that they had moved to a small town in the countryside. Moreover, the move was inspired by an article I had written, so I couldn't even complain. When I asked about what they planned to do with their house and land, they said they would transfer it to me. However, I am currently enjoying my married life in a condo, and receiving a house and land would only complicate things. My parents also said I could sell them, but it's not that simple. Do you understand about the gift tax? If I receive a house and land, it's natural for gift tax to occur. Even if I have savings, I don't have the margin to pay such taxes. I have a sister, but she's a graduate student and not in a position to pay. Likewise, relatives are unlikely to accept the land or house considering the tax implications. Well, knowing those two, they've probably already discussed it with their relatives. This means that even if I accept the house and land, it would not cause problems among relatives. However, the obligation to pay taxes would fall on me. I decided to discuss this issue first with my husband. It turns out, we're going to receive the house and land. If we have a house, we can move there and save on rent, Max suggested. Based on Max's suggestion, we decided to move to the house that used to be my family home. Indeed, if we live there, we won't need to pay rent. However, the issue of taxes remains unresolved. There are options for loans or installment payments, but these won't reduce the tax nor eliminate the need to pay it. In the end, I'll probably be the one paying. I also considered selling the house and land. I haven't decided whether to sell yet, but I've requested an appraisal for now. Then, the night we finished moving into my childhood home, my mother-in-law suddenly came to our house. Oh, what a lovely home. Yes, this was originally my family home. It's been beautifully renovated, hasn't it? My mother-in-law looked around happily. I felt somewhat uneasy. What brings you here today? When I asked my mother-in-law, my husband answered instead. Mom is going to live here with us, so she came to check out the rooms today. Live together? To my surprise, my mother-in-law continued. I was worried there might not be enough rooms since we hadn't decided on a place to live. Normally, there wouldn't be enough rooms. But this is a spacious single-family home, and there should be a room for me. So let's live together. That was my mother-in-law's argument. She didn't want to let her daughter-in-law, me, live in a house she was paying rent for. However, if she desired to live together, she might be asked to pay rent. That's why she recommended living in an apartment at the beginning of our marriage. Now the situation has changed, and there is a spacious house with land. There are many rooms, and more importantly, no rent is needed, which is a major attraction. If she lives in this house, she wouldn't need to pay rent. Additionally, she could use the remittances from my father-in-law for herself, thus gaining doubly. All of this seems very convenient for you, mother-in-law. What? Does the daughter-in-law have a complaint? Of course I do. This place is. I was about to argue when my husband interrupted. That's enough, Julia. You're the daughter-in-law. You should be a bit more tolerant. What? Why should I? You really are selfish. When the family decides, it's by majority vote, right? So, since Dad is on a work assignment, there are 3 of us at home, and the opinions of me and Mom align. What? You're so oblivious. So, in essence, we are a family of 3, me, my husband, and my mother-in-law. Since my husband and mother-in-law agree, I should also comply with their view. I can't accept this. For the time being, I kicked my mother-in-law out of the house that day. However, she is bound to strongly push for living together again in the future. During this difficult time, I had to go on a business trip. Reluctantly, I prepared for a one-night, 2-day business trip. I was sure my mother-in-law would come over while I was away. With that in mind, I hurried to work. Yet, my mother-in-law's audacity far exceeded my imagination. She had already imposed herself on my house. What is this? When I returned home, there was a truck parked in front of the house, and furniture like chests and dressing tables were being moved in. It looked as though someone was moving in, and then my mother-in-law suddenly appeared. Welcome back, Julia. What are you doing? I'm moving in. You can't be serious. Looking forward to living together. My mother-in-law smiled broadly, taking advantage of my absence. She had already moved in. This is absolutely impossible. For a daughter-in-law, you really don't know when to give up. If you don't like it, I'll just have to kick you out. Kick me out? This is my house. Anyway, I'll remove your things myself. Saying that, I entered the house. Once inside, my mother-in-law smirked and said, "You know nothing. Possibly removing someone's belongings is illegal. That's for rental agreements, isn't it? If it's family, it's even more complicated. Then I'll sell the house immediately." As I responded, my husband, sensing the commotion, hurried out. Seeing me, he said, "You're back. Julia, help mom with the move?" That's a joke. I already refused. But we're family. If that's the case, I'm ending this family. I'm getting a divorce. I don't mind, but I won't leave this place until I get the house or the land. I intend to sell both the house and the land. As long as we live here, you can't sell it. My husband glared at me as he said this defiantly. This isn't a discussion. I'm getting a divorce anyway, so from now on, contact me through a lawyer. Saying that, I rushed inside the house and gathered the necessary items from my room. Then, I left the house immediately. Afterward, I quickly arranged to move my belongings out. The destination for my belongings was my sister's house. Since I often travel for work, I don't have many belongings. Therefore, I arranged to use a room at my sister's house. Furthermore, I hired a lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Surprisingly, my husband did not argue and agreed to the divorce negotiations. The last time we met at the lawyer's office, he said, "Finally, I can relax without any disturbances." I retorted, "This past week has been really tough, but now I finally feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders." "Well, say whatever you want, but now we need to talk about property division. I've left that matter to the lawyer. Surely, you'll regret the day you drove me out." With those words, I left the lawyer's office. That night, while I was sleeping at my sister's house, I suddenly received a call from my mother-in-law. "So, the room is completely dark. It's naturally dark because it's the middle of the night. You must have done something." As my mother-in-law pressed on, I explained what had happened. Then she retorted, "This is revenge for the divorce, isn't it? Don't you understand yet? I said I would sell the house. And I've stopped the gas, electricity, and water to prepare it for sale." "What? You stopped them?" After being driven out by my mother-in-law, I contacted the real estate agent I had previously asked for an appraisal. I requested to sell at the appraised price, but it wouldn't happen immediately, and I was told that the procedure would take some time. When I asked the agent how to proceed, they advised me to go ahead with stopping the utilities before moving out. Indeed, it is common to cancel these contracts when moving. I followed that procedure. That's why I stopped the water and electricity. What? Even if I turn the breaker on, the electricity won't come? That would be the case. My family home uses a smart meter, so the electricity supply should be remotely cut off. Turning on the breaker wouldn't work. There's nothing I can do now. Is this harassment? That wasn't my intention. However, misunderstanding that I was deliberately harassing her, she said, "This is going to court. I'll seek damages. Please do as you like. But have you forgotten what I just said?" "What?" "If you keep staying there, you might end up going to jail, you know?" "What? Jail?" "If there are noises in a completely dark house, the neighbors will become suspicious, won't they?" It seems she finally realized the seriousness of the situation. My mother-in-law was in a completely dark room. Moreover, the light from her smartphone was visible from outside. From the outside, it looked like someone had broken into the house. During this time, I could hear hurried, frantic sounds over the phone. Max's voice also sounded panicked. "Max, hurry. What's going on, Mom? What are you doing in the middle of the night? We need to leave here quickly." Along with that voice, I could hear police sirens in the distance. It looks like someone called the police. I sighed and ended the call. A few minutes later, I received a call from the police. I explained that the divorce had been finalized and that the individuals involved were my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law. Fortunately, they were not arrested, but the incident attracted quite a bit of attention. The commotion spread around the neighborhood, and my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were forced to leave the house. Moreover, this issue reached his workplace, and it seems he was fired. Since he worked for a security company where trust is paramount, this outcome was expected. Having lost their place to live, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law moved in with my ex-father-in-law, who was on a work assignment. There, they received a severe reprimand and are currently working part-time at my ex-father-in-law's company. Later, I received a message from my ex-father-in-law that they would pay alimony from their part-time earnings. As for myself, this whole experience was recognized, and I was transferred to a department dealing with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issues in a weekly magazine. I now travel less and have a better environment to focus on my work. The house and land were sold, but the amount left after paying the taxes was not substantial. However, it is enough for a down payment on a new condo, so I'm considering buying one once things settle down. In the future, I hope to live there with a new partner, and for that reason, I am actively participating in matchmaking activities again. I am afraid of the weekend coming. Life in the dream home has just begun. Currently, we are hosting a party every week at our home to welcome my in-laws. My wishes are not reflected, and my time for rest is being cut short. At the party, I am made to work as hands and feet for my in-laws. My spouse and I have been married for 3 years, working together. In the early days of our marriage, we lived in a 2-room rental apartment. Hey, shall we start building our own house soon? Yes, I also want to live in our own house. Buying a house was a big investment. I supported my husband, who is loose with money, and worked hard on saving and budgeting. Finally, we were able to see the possibility of buying our own house and started looking for a property. How's the property search going? There's so much to decide, nothing has been finalized yet. I spent my holidays on property searches, and fatigue accumulated. Hey, could you help out a bit? I can't, I have work. You're really not reliable. Oh, right. How about searching with my parents? Why? I don't want to bother your parents. It's fine. My parents are also concerned. What do you mean? Well, it's all right. It's all right. Although I was concerned about my husband's hesitant talk, honestly, I was not good at getting along with my in-laws and preferred to avoid spending time together. Despite this, contrary to my expectations, I was contacted by my in-laws right away. Hey, have you decided on the new house? I was thinking of asking a construction company run by my friend. No, we want to decide on the new house by ourselves. Despite my indirect refusal, a few days later, I heard from a contact about a very good piece of land. I heard the construction company hasn't contacted you. Did you make sure to contact them? Before I knew it, plans were underway to build a house on a piece of land I didn't know about, by a construction company I didn't even know. Actually, we want to decide everything by ourselves. Oh, my son said he wants us to take care of it. Make sure all the appliances are fully electric. The intervention by my in-laws became stronger day by day. I asked my husband to ask his parents to stop interfering. Why can't you accept my parents' suggestions? I want to hear your thoughts. It's noisy. Just take my parents' opinions as mine. How can you say that? Proposing to create a vegetable patch where the car is supposed to be parked or installing a pizza oven in the kitchen, are those really your ideas? After such exchanges, one day came just before the construction was to start. Please confirm the contents of this contract one more time. It was a call from the construction company we had commissioned to build the new house. Since I had thoroughly discussed it with the architect, I replied, yes, there's no problem. Is there any mistake? The person from the construction company continued somewhat reluctantly. I had heard it was for you and your spouse to live in. Yes, that's right. What about it? Then the person from the construction company shared a shocking fact. This design, it's almost like it's for a 2-generation household. I felt a sensation of my head turning blank. That's not right. I don't know how the plan was carried out, But my in-laws had intervened without permission in the design. I confirmed with the construction company, saying changes are necessary, and had it altered. Moreover, they spoke as if I had agreed to those changes. The construction company was also perplexed, and I deeply apologize. Then farm tools were delivered to where the garage was supposed to be made, and it had been switched to a plan to start a home garden. This, too, was the work of my in-laws. The builder asked me, "Is it really okay to start construction?" A few days later, a notice of unexpected furniture delivery was in the mailbox. It was cash on delivery, and again, this was the work of my in-laws. This was clearly overstepping. It was no longer possible to solve this through my husband. I reached my limit of patience and appealed directly to my in-laws. "Father, mother, please stop acting on your own. Why is it bad? It's wrong for you to interfere in the house we will live in." "What? Our house?" Incredibly, it seemed my in-laws had assumed we would be living together. I hurriedly contacted my husband. "Your parents have a big misunderstanding." "What do you mean?" "They think they will live in our new house with us." Oh, that conversation. My heart chilled at my husband's calm reaction. I couldn't believe it. "I think that's the best idea." "What are you talking about? I haven't heard anything about this." "Well, I'm telling you now. That should be enough." Unbelievable. I absolutely oppose it. Wait a minute. This is about my parents. Why do you oppose it? It seemed my husband had no doubts about living with his parents. On the other hand, he pressed as if to blame me for my opposition. "Can't you, as a wife, get along with my parents?" But the design was changed without my consent. "Well, the elderly like to meddle. It's from goodwill." "That's not possible. There's no trust between me, you, and your parents. We can build that trust from now on. The problem is now. I can't live with people I can't trust. You're being too sensitive." "Then, we should cancel the new house plan. Stop the construction. Let's calm down." My firm opposition led to the cancellation of the plan to live with my in-laws. Doubts about my husband remained unresolved, and it seemed he was also dissatisfied with me. Amidst this, our new house was finally completed. I felt positive for the first time in a while about deepening our family bonds while cooperating with my husband in this house. On moving day, when we had settled the luggage, my husband broached an important topic. "Now that we have our own house, I've started to feel the responsibility of being the head of the family." "I see. I want you to listen. I want you, as my wife, to have that sense of responsibility too. Being a wife, isn't that a bit much?" "Hey, I'm being serious here." I felt a bit of discomfort at my husband's confident posture with his arms crossed. However, thinking it was good that he started to feel a sense of responsibility, I replied, "Yes, understood." But I would soon regret that decision. It was the weekend, and my husband called me on his way home. "Tomorrow, I've invited some colleagues from work over. I need you to prepare for the party." "What, tomorrow? Why so sudden?" "Why? Because it's tomorrow. You'll have time to prepare." "But I have a hair salon appointment tomorrow." "What are you talking about? Think about what's more important." My husband insisted. My parents will come over to help, so be thankful." "What?" It was the first weekend after moving into our new house. I was looking forward to changing the layout of the kitchen and living room, but my excitement vanished in an instant. Furthermore, those in-laws of mine were coming to help. I couldn't help but feel anxious. On the day of the home party, my in-laws arrived early in the morning. As I was busy with the food preparation, when I asked for their help, they said, "Oh, such plain dishes. At least order some finger food. I'll handle the ordering." Actually, the food is already prepared and we have finger food ready. We can't afford any more orders. What are you saying? Are you trying to shame your husband? Being stingy could affect your husband's promotion. What an understanding wife you are. Could you help with the party preparations instead? Sorry, I have a hair salon appointment. See you later. Make sure to set up the food properly when it arrives. Leaving those words behind, my in-laws went out after only making their demands known. My husband was still asleep in his room. Somehow, I managed to finish the party preparations in time. When I tried to get myself ready before the guests arrived. Look, this place is dirty. Hey, what's this dust in the entrance? Clean it properly. We're running low on beer, go buy more. Ordered around by my husband and in-laws, who had just gotten ready, I ended up welcoming the guests without even having time to put on makeup. Welcome, everyone. Please, this way. Now, serve the guests some drinks. Hurry up, will you? The party that day was the toughest for me. My stylish mother-in-law treated me like a servant. Without introducing me, when I greeted a few guests myself, they were puzzled by my appearance in a greasy apron without makeup. They probably thought I was a servant of the house, which was humiliating. Afterward, my husband started to host parties every weekend, and my in-laws never failed to visit. Colleagues from work, their families, and even neighbors were invited without prior consultation. My in-laws continued to play the glamorous hosts at the parties without offering any help, ordering me around. My husband adopted the same attitude as his parents. Initially, I complained to my husband. Please, let's not have parties every weekend. Why not? Everyone's having fun. I work too, and preparing for parties all weekend really wears me out. My parents are helping, aren't they? Helping? You call that helping? It's because you can't handle the guests that my parents are stepping in. All your parents do is eat and talk without preparing or cleaning up. What do you mean? There's no need to talk about my parents like that. But it's true. First of all, it's because you refuse to live with them that my parents have to come from far away. I sighed internally at this exchange. My husband always brought up the fact that I had refused to live with his parents whenever I objected to something. He continued to argue that since I had accepted his requests, I should also listen to his desires. Amidst the days spent without rest, I suddenly realized that I hadn't yet invited my own parents to our new house. So, I proposed, I want to skip the party this weekend and invite my parents over. What are you talking about? No, I object. Object? Do you even have the awareness of being a wife? You married into my family. And above all, don't belittle my parents. I'm not belittling anyone. Well, I don't mind you inviting them, but my parents come first. But your parents come every weekend, and because of the parties, I can never invite mine. How did it come to this? How much more does my husband expect me to sacrifice? Reaching this thought, I decided that I needed to consult someone about this situation. So, I called my mother and told her everything that had happened. I apologized tearfully for not being able to invite her to our new house. My mother was surprised but listened to me calmly. For now, come home this weekend, but I have to prepare for the party. You still haven't realized it, have you? Realized what? You're losing sight of yourself because of exhaustion. Awakened by my mother's words, I felt enlightened. And then my mother continued. I've come up with a plan, but I won't proceed if you're against it. Hearing the plan, I was taken aback. If executed, it would have a significant impact on my husband. I was left unsure whether to proceed. Talk to him one more time, then decide. My mother left the final decision up to me. I decided to talk to my husband again. Why are we back to this topic? Just invite your parents when mine aren't here. I interrupted my husband's words and made my position clear. Listen, this is your last chance. Not to plan home parties on his own. Of course, to get my consent for his parents' weekly visits too. And this time, to invite my parents. I conveyed these conditions, hoping my husband would accept them. Last chance, you're joking. I won't allow you or your parents to do as you please anymore. Listen, since you refuse to live with my parents, you should prioritize them. As usual, my husband started blaming me for lacking family awareness. Furthermore, he stated, "A wife like you won't allow her family through our door. Never invite your parents, and if you're dissatisfied, leave." Realizing that arguing with him was futile, I had hoped patience would lead to his concession, but it was the opposite. Biting my lip, I conveyed my last hope, "You'll regret this." However, he scoffed, "I won't regret it, don't show your face to me again." With that, I left the house and spent some time at my parents' house. As time passed, I regained my composure. Following my husband had made me realize how brainwashed I had been. For my husband, it turned out that his self-esteem and vanity were more valuable than the concept of family. In his desire to appear admirable, he exploited our new house and his wife's role for selfish purposes. Afterward, I decided to listen to my mother's proposal. Several weeks had passed since I returned to my parents' home. My health had recovered. Since my workplace was close to my parents' home, my enthusiasm for work returned and I was living energetically. Yet, messages from my husband continued unabated, starting with "I'll forgive you if," always from a position of superiority. He was always concerned about the preparations for the home parties. Lately, the gatherings we planned at our house were canceled. "It's your fault. My position at work is getting worse because of this. How will you take responsibility? Think a little. I want you to fulfill your role as a wife at the important home parties." My husband was furious that I hadn't returned home, especially since he had a special home party planned for the end of the month. This party was to welcome important people from his workplace at our house, a highly prestigious event for him, supposedly ensuring his promotion if successful. On that special day, I, dressed up, headed to our home with my parents. My husband and in-laws were busy preparing to welcome the guests, managing the delivered food and drinks. My husband's bosses and colleagues were also present, and I exchanged greetings with them. "Oh, you look very charming in that dress." "Thank you." Seeing me, my husband and in-laws immediately approached with excitement. "Hey, what are you doing? Hurry up and help. What's with that outfit? What kind of wife are you, wandering around like that?" As my in-laws reached for the hem of my dress, my mother stepped forward from behind and clearly swatted their hands away. "Please don't touch the dress I designed with your greasy hands." "What is this? Who are you?" "Hey, that's my wife. You don't get to speak. It's unpleasant to be referred to in that manner towards my daughter." During this exchange, my husband's complexion rapidly changed. "You are what, daughter? You are the host of tonight's party, aren't you? Please show us around." "Oh, it was you who said we shouldn't cross the threshold of this house, right?" "Huh, what are you talking about? You said that?" Well, that." My husband's face turned from blue to red, changing like a traffic light. In fact, the guest of honor at today's gathering was my mother. My parents were executives in a major fashion industry company, and my husband's company had been planning to collaborate with the design department led by my mother for this fiscal year's business plan. Therefore, my husband suggested entertaining them with his proud home party. My mother, who operates under her maiden name, seemed unrecognized by my husband, although they had actually met before the marriage. Well, considering my husband's nature, he probably forgot. "Really, what kind of upbringing does your daughter have? Quick, to the kitchen. It's just right. Take your parents with you." "Stop it. This person is a special guest." "What?" My husband and in-laws were flustered and unsettled. My mother gave my husband a light glance, asking him to bring some drinks, please. Rushing to the kitchen, my husband returned with glasses. After checking the 2 glasses provided, she asked, "Could you also get one for my daughter?" Glancing at me, aware of his bosses and colleagues around, he brought a glass for me with his head down. I gracefully accepted it, giving my in-laws a firm look. "Could you also take care of the food?" What?" "Yes, understood. I'd like to sit down. Could you lend me a chair?" Yes, of course. Doesn't this seem like too few dishes?" Oh, does it? How about French? Shall we order some? Of course, the bill is on you." The budget is a bit. Oh dear, scrimping might affect your son's future, you know. While tilting my glass, I smiled warmly towards them. In fact, among those invited to today's party were individuals who had been acquainted with my mother from past visits to our house. And it seems they had relayed to my mother the cold treatment I received from my husband and in-laws at a previous home party. Dressed in a shabby apron, looking nothing like the lady of the house, I only realized she was your daughter when we exchanged greetings. She seemed very tired. My weakness had caused concern for my mother. Though I've regained my spirit now, that difficult period had weighed heavily on my heart. During the party, my mother kept my husband busy fetching drinks, continuously pointing out the work ethic of my in-laws, while my father deepened his acquaintance with people from my husband's workplace. After the party ended, I approached my husband. "Good work. Please, sign this." I handed him a divorce petition. Feeling humiliated by the day's events, my husband signed in a rage. Although my in-laws tried to stop him, my husband was resolute. "There, it's over. Don't ever show up in front of me again." Taking the divorce petition, I left my husband's house. Exiting the gate and looking back, I knew I would never return. Thus, I bid farewell to the dream home I once longed for. The house had changed my husband's character completely, and I had nearly lost myself in the process. My attachment to this house had already vanished. Leaving the home party behind felt liberating. Afterward, I focused on my work, trying to forget the unpleasant memories of the past. With the divorce, being freed from the mortgage payments of my husband's house and the expenses related to the parties, I found financial relief. I started a new life in a rented apartment, away from my parents' home. My ex-husband was transferred to another region by his company, seemingly seen as a liability in the business dealings involving my mother. Moving to a new place, my ex-husband could no longer live in the previous house. Burdened with the house's mortgage on his own, he sought support from his parents, who apparently refused. As a result, there's been tension between my ex-husband and his parents. What became of the house after I left is unknown to me. I've overcome past difficulties, decorating my new place to my liking, improving my cooking skills on weekends, and leading a fulfilling life. Occasionally, I invite my parents over and host small home parties with homemade dishes. In this way, I've been able to spend warm and wonderful times with my family. Moving forward, I plan to cherish my parents and live with gratitude for each happy day.